This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
Thanks very much. We're on. We're good. Lori, thanks for the introduction. This is a really great pleasure to be here. First visit to the Ocala location of IHMC, and as Lori indicated, with IHMC now for a little bit under 2 years, but very excited to be with the organization and looking forward to telling you about sort of where we are today and where we're headed when it comes to this research pillar. Let me make sure this works. Yes? Okay, good. So, had a great opportunity to talk with a few of you prior to this lecture, and you've probably seen this slide before, but I probably refer back to sort of the three arms or three pillars of IHMC research as we go through the discussion today. IHMC, as many of you know, founded by Dr. Ken Ford, and primarily focused on artificial intelligence and computer science. About 10 years ago, developed a very strong and vibrant robotics research program, and which sort of became the second leg of the stool. And really this third leg of the stool in human performance, what we're going to talk about today, is, over just the last few years, and now we think is on a rapid upward growth trajectory. But the one thing I want to make sure I recognize before diving sort of into this pillar over here is that all three of these work together very well and collaborate amongst one another. And as Lori said, I love to learn something new every day. Oftentimes it's from one of the other two pillars. So we have strong collaborations, which you'll see with the robotics team and with the AI team. And some of the most outstanding artificial intelligence scientists in the world are right here at the Ocala location, and we work together a lot. So we will dive right into what we're going to talk about. So I want to talk to you about what we're doing to lead the way. HRP is the sort of acronym for this branch of IHMC, healthspan, resilience, and performance. And I'm going to define each of those three terms. But basically what we want to do is understand from the smallest puzzle pieces in our body, these little chemicals and molecules, out to the whole human, what determines our ability to maintain health, improve health, and in doing so become more resilient and have a higher level of performance, whether that be physical, cognitive, psychological, behavioral. We want to be able to maximize our performance capacity. And then test interventions, once we understand what the pieces are, test interventions to improve upon those three things: performance, health span, and resilience. So I'm going to give you just a couple of examples today of the types of research that we are doing or have done. And then really at the end, highlight what is in the planning and where IHMC is headed in this area. So let's just define these terms. These are words you probably have heard, maybe not necessarily recognize how we define them. So I'll just quickly tell you, when we talk about health span, it's really the portion of a person's life during which they're generally in good health. Okay, that sounds pretty simple. On the next slide, you'll see a picture of that. Resilience is really our ability to respond and adapt to challenge. That might be a physical challenge, it might be environmental, it might be behavioral, it might just be an overall source of stress. But our ability to respond to that and adapt to it and come out on the other side with rapid recovery, that is resilience. And you can think about applying that to just about any aspect of your daily life. And then ultimately, performance. What are the capabilities that we have, but also what are the limitations that we have? And ultimately, how do those two things combine to determine our ability to execute, whatever that task may be? So those are the three areas that we'll touch on today. So let's just give you an example, really, what health span looks like. Health span is really, if we look at the lifespan in age, in years here, on the x-axis, and sort of how healthy we are. Okay, a typical trajectory as we sort of reach peak performance or peak health, okay, around the third decade of life, and then we start to decline over time. What we're trying to do by improving health span is actually extend to the right the time over which we are maintaining good health. Okay, and so that's the ultimate goal, is to sort of push this to the right, and that's what we would call an improvement in health span. Essentially spending fewer of the later years in a deconditioned or poor health state. So let's just talk about resilience. What is that? Well, if something has high resilience, going back to the definition, if a system has high resilience, that means it's able to withstand stressors from the outside pretty well. And this is the example here is this ball that's sort of cradled and is in a very robust state of maintenance. Whereas this ball over here on the right has low resilience. With any little movement, it may tip, right? So what we want to do is move from a frail or fragile system to one that's much more resilient to the left. And in doing so, not just maintain resilience, but also when we do have to experience stressors, recover from those rapidly, as opposed to recovering from those slowly. And then the other one that we just want to define quickly is performance. And I put this up because our ability to execute a task is influenced by many, many things. Some of those are small molecules in our body called genes. Some of those are environmental influences. Some of those are how we behave or what our attitude is towards something. So what our affect is or our psychological state matters. Sort of how we deal with stress, whether or not there are physical sources of stress or physical challenges that impact our performance. You know, how we're eating, how we're sleeping, all these things influence ultimately performance. And I'll touch on this in a real research application, some of the work that we've done in the military fairly recently. So the mission of this program, this sort of new thing at IHMC, we're very excited about this. So we want to exert a transformational impact, and by doing that, advance science. And that's not limited to physical, it's not limited to cognitive, it's both with psychological health and performance as well. So it's really all three of those, and that's the ultimate goal in this program. And it's not just doing things at the most applied level, which is having somebody perform a task and scoring it. It's also understanding it, going all the way back to those small chemicals in the body, so from molecule to whole human. This is a kind of a nice way to summarize that. So molecular activities in our body, whether it's at the gene level or the protein level, really kind of determines how our cells respond, and then ultimately how all the little cells respond defines how the whole body responds at sort of the physiological level, okay? And we want to understand from molecule to whole human. An application of that on the right is how do we optimize? Remember, HRP we'll see a lot, right? Health span, resilience, and performance. How do we optimize that, or those three things, in the face of extreme stressors or extreme environments? And these are just three examples. So IHMC, as you know, has a lengthy history of doing research that is focused on Department of Defense and military applications. We'll talk about some of that tonight. But also, we're interested in populations of individuals that are suffering from a given disease or perhaps a disability. And this is one of my favorite pictures at IHMC, and you all have seen videos of our exoskeleton work, but that's Mark Daniel, part of our research team. And you can just sort of see what he might be thinking as he's looking at this exoskeleton. Mark is a paraplegic, so he's spinal cord injured, does not have use of his legs. But if you put him in our exoskeleton, this is actually him competing in an international competition called the Cybathlon, where IHMC finished second in 2016. This is one way in which we combine our ability to manipulate or improve the human body with our engineering expertise to improve functionality based on mechanics and electronics. Okay? All right, so this is an important concept for me. Hopefully it'll be conveyed to you as I intend it. Every physiological or organ system that you have, that we all have, is a demand-based system. What I mean by that, we put demands on our system every day, and those systems have to respond to those demands. If the demand is chronically too much, such as somebody who has chronic, in this case, high blood pressure, the risk of that over time, if it's not treated, is that the system cannot handle that chronic high demand, and you end up with a pathologic state, okay? On the other end of that spectrum, though, if we chronically expose ourselves to low demand, we also have a very high risk of pathology. Okay? So where we try to intervene, exercise being one of the ways in which we try to intervene, not the only way, is to actually introduce intermittent periods of high demand, which forces our organ systems to adapt. Then when you're in a resting state, you're actually in a better resting state than you once were. So this is an important concept. Think about demand-driven adaptations as we go through the discussion today. And I should have said at the outset, if you have any questions, just let me know, speak up. Love to take questions as we go. So let's just introduce you a little bit to how we might better understand factors that determine health and abilities. Okay? Well, I'm going to do this as an example, and this is a project that we recently completed with the Department of Defense. I will not provide a lot of detail on this project because I'm not allowed to provide a lot of detail on this project, but I will give you some overview information. So suffice it to say, we were asked in this program to help the military understand factors that might be important in identifying people who could really perform at a high level. So we said, well, what are some of those things that might be involved in that? Well, we kind of want to know physically and physiologically what they look like. So we tested a whole bunch of physical and physiological performance measures. We kind of want to know what they're made of, so we do a whole body composition scan using what's called a DEXA machine. We want to know how they're performing cognitively, how well they deal with stress, what their psychological profile is, actually how well they perform in a team, and then ultimately when we really stress them out, physically and cognitively, what are those little molecules doing? So with all that, we really comprehensively evaluated some folks, and I won't read all of this to you, but data were collected in all these buckets that are highlighted in red, about 2,700 different sources of information, and from all those sources of information, we wanted to say, how can we put all this into a AI machine learning blender to tell us what are the most important determinants of really being able to perform at a high level? So this is a map that's complex, but essentially you start with the people, you identify through all those tests and measures what they look like and how they perform, and then you, through collecting samples, you do things looking at their gene profile, their protein profile, and so forth. And over the course of machine learning, which is a high-level computational process, start to come out on the other end of all these steps with things that predict whether or not somebody is going to perform at a high level. So that can be applied later, right? Because ultimately, we don't necessarily want to have to test 2,700 variables on a group of candidates for any job, much less a military job. If we could take those 2,700 and say, of these 2,700, these 20% are the keys, or these 10% are the keys. So that was the purpose of this program. And this is a way of just sort of summarizing some of that for you today. So what you're seeing on the left, which is probably hard to interpret, but all these little dots, these are individual features from those 2,700 things. And each square is a person. And from left to right, you can see the people who ended up in the higher performing category, which are under this red bar. The map tends to turn from more blue to more red as you go left to right. These are the top 100 features shown in this map. And then here, we're summarizing them so they start to make sense. So from those data buckets, right, what we found is that through some series of questionnaires, let's just start here. The people who performed at a high level were actually better at regulating their own emotions. They were what I would call the cool customer. You give them a stress, or you try to make them angry, or you try to make them upset. These are the cool customers. Okay, so that was sort of the one of the number one outcomes. When you look in their blood, they're actually better at carrying oxygen, and they have higher levels of things that help them heal from wounds. So you can imagine a lot of physical stress might be important if you have high endurance you can carry oxygen better, you can heal wounds better. Okay, so those were key things. When we look at their bones, or their entire composition of their body, they actually have higher bone density. And they have stronger bones in areas that we are concerned about. The femur and the neck of the femur, this is your thigh bone. And the neck is where the thigh bone forms a joint with the hip. That's a real susceptible place for fracture. Even in young people, if they're doing physical military maneuvers with a 150-pound rucksack, they need to have strong bones. And so these are people coming into this environment, walking in the door with better bones. Cognitively, they've processed math faster. They had better stress responses, and we do that through speech recognition or speech recording. Physiologically, we actually do some tests that we would summarize for you in a simple term, which is grit. And when we really push people to the max and you're measuring physiology, I can differentiate two people based on their individual willingness to go further into the test. So they may have the same level of performance on the test, but there are markers of their physiology. It's their heart rate response, how they're breathing, all those things that tell me this person went deeper or dug deeper. And so we summarize that sort of as grit. And then interestingly for us, two other things. One was we used some wearable technology. And we were interested in how disciplined are they in their sleep habits, knowing what they're going to be going through the following day, and then the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Were they religious about trying to get good sleep? And did they get good sleep? And it turns out that those who actually had what we call better sleep hygiene, meaning these are voluntary behavior choices they made, when they went to bed, how quickly they fell asleep, how well did they use that time that the military gave them to actually get sleep. They had better sleep hygiene. And then the last one, when they were rated by teammates, this might not be surprising, but the people who sort of rose to the top were the ones that were rated as good leaders. So that was more of a validation. But that's an example of a project where we really are interested in, from molecule to whole person, how do people perform? So that's a military application. The next application I'm going to give you is in a chronic disease state, which we studied a lot at UAB, and that was Parkinson's disease. We have efforts now to continue that at IHMC, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. But this is an example of a testing and intervention to see if we can optimize performance, improve health status, and in this case, it's in Parkinson's. We've done a lot of work in aging individuals with advanced stages of heart failure and osteoarthritis and multiple sclerosis and a variety of other conditions, spinal cord injury. But I chose, just for the sake of time, I wanted to give you Parkinson's. So if we apply an intervention to a group of people, the first thing we know is not everybody's going to respond the same. So that's the first rule of thumb. Now, that's not unique to what I do. That's with any treatment. If you look in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, in the drug field, any medication has probably about a 30% non-responder rate. Hypertensives, antihypertensives are some of the worst in terms of, you go to a physician, you got high blood pressure, you get a medication. A few months later, they switch the drug, change the dose, do something, because they're trying to find what works for you, right? So there's always this risk of people not responding well. That's also true with us. We apply an intervention, not everybody responds the same. And some of the factors that define that are over here on the left, as well as here in the middle, and this is more of the chemicals in your body, okay? Sort of the molecular stuff. But we take an intervention, we test it in a group of people, we want to see how well they come out on the other side. And in the case of Parkinson's, if you don't know much about Parkinson's, I'll give you a brief summary. This is a neurodegenerative disease, the second most common neurodegenerative disease behind dementia and Alzheimer's disease. But this is a progressive disease. There's a part of the midbrain called the substantia nigra, which is losing neurons that are really important in our ability to control movement. Turns out they're also really important in other areas, and we'll touch on the non-motor areas in just a second. But these are dopaminergic neurons, and they're in this little region called the substantia nigra. Okay? So in a healthy brain, these are nice and dark as they should be, and in one with Parkinson's disease, you see less darkening, meaning some of these neurons are dying away. Some of the motor symptoms that are sort of classic, bradykinesia just means you move slower. Resting tremor is very classic with Parkinson's. If any of you have family members or friends or anyone with Parkinson's, you're probably aware of the tremor. Some people are more tremor dominant and others are dominant in other areas, but tremor is one. Rigidity. Rigidity is rigidity to move is one, so they're a little stiff to move. And then postural instability, so a little bit of a difficulty maintaining good upright posture, start to stoop. Okay. Now, consequences, weakness, fatigue, difficulty moving around, and then non-motor symptoms, loss of smell, issues with cognition, sleep, depression, constipation, other things that are not directly related to the motor system also come to bear. And then this last one, mitochondria. How many of you have heard of mitochondria? Good. A big percentage of you. So these are the little energy-producing components inside each of your body's cells. So we want the function of these to be really good because that supplies the fuel for your cells to do their cellular work. And you add all those up and you have your whole body doing what it's supposed to be doing. So mitochondrial function is really important, and we'll talk about how we measure that and sort of what the outcomes are. So we chose exercise training at a high intensity. This had never been done in people with Parkinson's. The picture is my former graduate student, Neil Kelly, who led the work, and his wife, Sam, and their first little boy. He's now finishing medical school at Cornell in New York. So we did this high-intensity exercise training study as a rehabilitation approach in Parkinson's. Here's what we found. I'm jumping to some clinically important outcomes of this. Number one, I want to point your attention to the left. We tested simple things like strength. How strong are your legs now? This is where they start. This blue hashed area is what the strength is of young men. And after 16 weeks of doing this with us, the people with Parkinson's who are in their 70s have strength equal to those young men. So if you think back to healthspan, right, we've sort of restored something really important for an older person with Parkinson's to be mobile, be able to get up and down out of a chair, climb stairs, and so forth. These are two important clinical scales, just to point you to the green arrows. PDQ-39, this is the Parkinson's disease quality of life scale. And everything with a green arrow was improved. Okay? So their ability to perform daily tasks, their emotional well-being, their cognition, their overall index score on this index was improved. UPDRS, this is the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. This is what neurologists would use in a clinical setting to score to see where you are today in your disease, and then a few months later do it again. And over time, watch that score change. The goal with any treatment for Parkinson's is to improve on that or at least maintain it, or reduce the rate of change in it in the wrong direction. What we found in 4 months was actually kind of almost shocking to us. It wasn't really that surprising. By the way, if the score goes down, it's an improvement. So the motor score got better, the total score got better. And the change in the total score of about 4 points is actually equivalent or better than some of the changes in that scoring after a year of a new drug treatment. So 4 months' time, high-intensity work, pretty remarkable improvements. All right. Now, I'm going to go into the little cells for a minute. So hang in there. We took muscle samples from these folks because people have been focused on the brain. We know there's a very important brain-to-muscle connection, and we wanted to understand, was there anything different or pathologic about Parkinson's muscle that was different from normal aging muscle? And then did our intervention do anything to benefit those changes? So the first thing I will tell you is muscles. This is a picture of a biopsied piece of muscle that we have stained in a lab to reveal the different types of cells in that muscle. So the color means the type of cell that it is, okay? You really don't need to know much more than that, other than for me to tell you that a normal muscle has a mosaic of colors. The different cells should be spread across the muscle in a pattern that is very heterogeneous. There aren't big clumps of one type of cell. That's how a muscle functions really well. So that picture is a good muscle. Now, what matters is how big each of those fibers or cells is. And as we get older, they all get smaller, okay? With high-intensity rehabilitation, we can make them a little bit bigger again. And in this case, we actually restored the size of these cells to where young men would be, or were. So we have comparative studies we do directly with younger people. So they start with small fibers or small cells, and they grow quite a bit. So in 4 months' time, that was another sort of health span reversal, okay? The next thing we did is we looked at how well is the muscle receiving blood. So have we all heard of capillaries? So the smallest of blood vessels deliver the blood, exchange gases and nutrients with the cells, right? Well, what matters to a cell is how well it's being perfused with blood. What's the supply coming in? And what's the opportunity to dump metabolic waste and things back into the blood? So in an aging muscle, we actually lose some of those capillaries, and so the muscle has a less of an opportunity to receive good stuff and get rid of bad stuff. Well, what we found is, once again, they start low, and by the end of the study, they're sort of up with the young people. So we induced what we would call capillary angiogenesis, or new capillaries were formed because of the higher intensity work. This goes directly back to that demand-based system. If you put a high demand on it, at least for intermittent periods of time, you get an outcome that's beneficial. And then the last one, those little energy-producing sort of energy houses in the cell called mitochondria. Same thing, started low, and after 4 months, matched the younger folks. So you put all that together, we say, wow, that's pretty cool. 4 months of really high-intensity work 3 times a week had a real big impact on people with Parkinson's. What did we do to the brain? Because that's where the disease starts. So we put people in an MRI magnet. We image what we do. We do these studies that are called functional connectivity, where we're looking for where is the brain metabolically active and what is it connected to with other parts of the brain. So we do this at rest, and then after this high-intensity exercise, about an hour later, they end up in the magnet again. And what you can see is that the areas of the brain that needed to be improved upon, substantia nigra is right there in the middle, but the prefrontal cortex at the top and the substantia nigra here at the bottom, both improved in metabolism by this type of exercise. So we think that there's a communication from those improvements in the brain to other organs such as the muscle. All right. Make sure I don't run over here. The last sort of part of this story that I wanted to tell you is we also discovered something very unique in these people with Parkinson's, and that was, I mentioned it earlier, hopefully you can see it in the light, but here's a nice normal muscle with those mosaic patterns, right? The one in the middle is aging, where you start to see more clumping of the copper-colored ones or the orange ones. And then on the right is aging with Parkinson's, where there's these massive clumps of these orange fibers. These are called type 1 fibers. That's not normal. We don't want that, because now the muscle won't function as well as it should. So the next question we asked was, did the intervention improve on that? Could we do anything to reverse that? It turns out So this is sort of what the explanation for it. The spinal cord sends nerves to these fibers, and then those fibers are innervated and activated and so forth. The nerve fibers actually define whether or not those fibers, for the sake of this discussion, are green or copper or black. There's 3 types, okay? Aging, you see that we start to see these clusters. With Parkinson's, massive clusters. And so there's this process where the nerve endings are not contacting the fibers properly. And it's what we call denervation. And then there's a survival attempt with renervation, or new nerves saying, hey, I'll save you. But in doing so, they change the type. So when we apply a higher intensity intervention, we start to see it go in reverse. So PD post-rehabilitation, less of that sort of island grouping, which tells us, it may not mean a lot to you to see it in a picture, but from a functional standpoint, this makes the person much more able to activate muscles and use them appropriately. Okay, they're much less fatigued. They're able to use the right amount of muscle and not over-recruit. And so in the end, we think this is a really important outcome of the studies. So, going from that back to those molecules that may help us understand why did that work. This is Kayleen Lavin, Dr. Kayleen Lavin, who's now with us at IHMC. She was with our group at UAB prior to going to IHMC, and very thankful that we were able to get her to come to IHMC. She and I started the same day, September 1st, 2020. She's a research scientist who really can help us go from that whole person down to those little chemicals, okay? So what I would call a computational biologist. So the first study that I will touch on is her looking at networks of genes that help explain why those muscles turn all orange or copper. And the next study is when we rehabilitated those folks and the muscles started to look better again, what networks of genes were involved in that? So, having said that, I will just show you this. What genes are you wearing? So, ultimately, that's really what questions we're asking. We all have a genetic makeup, but in order to use those genes, they have to be turned on. So, this is my attempt to sort of explain, we all have the same genes, essentially. Very few of us are different by small mutations and so forth. But it's what genes we are turning on and off that really define what we look like and how we behave and so forth. So, the first analysis that she did was to try to figure out why these fibers were losing their nerve connection and then being reconnected by an alternate nerve. And so what she found in that course of doing those molecular studies is that these people with Parkinson's had upregulation of genes that really helped to promote survival of these fibers, meaning, hey, I'm dying, give me a lifeline. I don't care what type it is, just give me a lifeline. And it turns out that the type 1 nerves are the ones that are most successful at finding those dying fibers and branching and saying, I'll save you. Okay? The next thing she found, axon guidance. This is that piece of the neuron or the nerve that's actually going to reconnect is called the axon. So a whole gene profile that determines how axons are guided through all that complex tissue was also upregulated. Recognition of a denervated state was another gene pool that was upregulated, and so forth. So it really makes sense, right? We start to identify what is the underlying story here. Now you do the rehabilitation and what happens. Firstly, this is interesting. What you see on the left is the expression. This is a summary of a whole bunch of genes in a muscle, okay? But YA is young adult. And these are sex-matched individuals to those with Parkinson's. OA is older adult. These are both sex and age matched to those with Parkinson's. And what you see is this particular cluster of genes is expressed at a lower level in the older adult compared to the young, but an even lower level in people with Parkinson's. So there's something in this set of genes that we really want to know about. But then you do the rehabilitation. and the people with Parkinson's shoot up here. So now they're normal in their expression of these genes. So do any of these genes then help us explain what we think might be happening in the brain and what we think might be happening in the spinal cord and in the muscle itself? And that's what really this shows. I won't bore you with the heat map. These are hard to sometimes interpret. But if you just focus here, the genes that were changing in the muscle were really genes that control these things: regeneration of muscle, promotion of new blood vessels in muscle, promotion of the extracellular or connective tissue remodeling of the muscle to kind of make the structure better, okay? Developing new nerves and protecting nerves. So all those pathways are interesting to us. I won't get into individual genes, but just suffice to say, there's a lot going on here that starts to make sense to us as to why this rehabilitation worked. Okay, so that's the direction sort of for the IHMC sort of future in health span resilience and performance. We want to do these types of studies. We are doing these types of studies, but I wanted to give you an example of something that's gone all the way through. Okay. So then the last thing I'll touch on is just sort of where are we going at IHMC? And this is very exciting for us. Okay? Over the last 3 years, since 2019, I said at the beginning, 4 to 5 years of activity to grow this new research pillar, right? So over the last 3 years, we've recruited a lot of talented people. So we're excited about that and growing this program out. It starts with scientists. Get the right people. Get the people who can come in with new ideas, be innovative, and also collaborate with the other innovative people who are already there. The people in robotics, the people in artificial intelligence, and other people in human performance. So we've done that. We've recruited a whole host of really top-notch folks over this period of time. And we're continuing to aggressively look for new people. Who are the next people? We want to grow this program. New directions in terms of what we're doing in research. I didn't put up grant numbers and all those things. It would just be too distracting. I want to summarize it into topic areas. So a lot of the new research funded over the last couple of years is very much driven by military-focused work, one of which is a treatment that we're testing in people going through jump school or parachuting school. Many of those people actually land wrong, have a concussion. We want to understand, can we help mitigate or reduce the negatives of having that concussion? While the military is teaching them how to land better, that's number one. But for those who don't land well, if they're taking our treatment, we want to know if it actually works. So that's one study that's happening. We have one that's actually evaluating whether or not, this is a hormone in our body called oxytocin. There's some evidence that this hormone may help us regulate body temperature when we're in cold water. It may also reduce inflammation and what we would call oxidative stress when we're really working hard. And so we're testing that, and that's funded by the Navy. We're doing some work in high altitude. So there are military units that are operating at 10,000 to 14,000 feet on a daily basis. When you spend that much time at high altitude, you can really start to negatively impact both physical and cognitive ability. So once again, a potential treatment that we're testing in those folks. Spaceflight performance. We're developing improvements in virtual reality systems to try to help improve our ability to perform in space. This is important going forward for a variety of reasons. I mean, the private space race is at an all-time high right now, right? But we also have a little-known new group of folks in the military called Space Force, which eventually may be manned. At this point, they're on the ground monitoring the skies. But there may be a future within the Air Force, Space Force, where we actually have people helping keep us safe who are in space long term. So this is an important program as well. Cold weather flight performance, cognitive resilience in the cockpit when you're exposed to things like low oxygen, high carbon dioxide, being dehydrated, all those things. So these are all very applied studies that are funded and active at IHMC. This is a group of things that we're also trying to do. So I want to make sure as a program we keep a nice balance between studying and helping improve the elite performers and studying and helping improve the other end of the spectrum. Those of us who are aging every day, we're all aging. You know, I spent a lot of time in aging research at UAB, and one of my good friends, one of the geriatricians, when we would talk about it, we had a Center for Aging. And I said, you know, we need to change the name of this. Do we really need a Center for Aging? Can't we change it to healthy aging or something? And he said, look, aging's a good thing. If you're not aging, you're dead. I said, fair enough. Fair enough, we'll keep the name. But spinal cord injury is a hot area for us, a really important priority area for us, using those exoskeletons. Parkinson's disease, we will continue to do that. We're also interested in how do we help people, not just in the military, this happens to be in the military, but others who are doing things under high stress for long periods of time. Are they adequately supplying themselves with nutrients to recover? And all of these studies, by the way, go from the whole person down to those little molecules in the body, okay? We're also interested in heart failure and actually developing some AI to monitor people remotely, to sort of have a better idea of symptoms without having them come into the clinic. Improving the exoskeletons themselves so they can be used by more people, and then also helping to understand how we regulate our metabolism, once again, when we're in high-stress conditions. So these are all new programs that we're trying to get supported. And then lastly, I'm very excited about this. Many of you know about this, but IHMC, with this facility and the two in Pensacola, currently has 3 buildings. And the 4th building is this one. So the healthspan Resilience Performance Research Complex is in the design phase and will break ground later this summer in Pensacola. We're very excited about it. And this will be a comprehensive facility to conduct that research from whole person to little molecule. And this will be a one-of-a-kind facility, not just for IHMC, but for the entire Northwest Florida region. So we're very excited about it. We'll be able to test people in stressful conditions, manipulate their environment, rehabilitate people, as well as go to the top floor, which is the 3rd floor, and analyze people all the way down to the chemicals. So this is going to be a really game-changing facility for the Institute and, frankly, for all of science, we hope and we think. So we're excited about that. Lastly, just to acknowledge lots of funding support over the years from DoD, the Department of Defense, as well as the National Institutes of Health and the VA system. I did not include that in the summary, but I and many of us at IHMC have a strong passion for veterans and wanting to help veterans. I spent 20 years in the VA in Birmingham as a part-time investigator, helping lead a research team there, and we want to continue that work. We actually have a VA scientist with us in Pensacola as an IHMC scientist. So we actually are making steps to collaborate very closely with the VA, and we're excited about that. And of course, I don't have room on a slide to list all the people, but certainly acknowledge the IHMC leadership for all their support in helping push towards this new effort, as well as all the research scientists and staff who are super people, all committed to what we do every day across both Ocala and Pensacola at IHMC. And then we also do a lot of work with collaborative institutions, medical schools, private institutions, and so forth. And certainly want to recognize that we do work with many of them, and then a lot of community support as well. So with that, I will stop and happy to take some questions. Yes, sir. Oh, you got to.
Let me remember, we just want the mic to go so that it'll get on the video. Okay, here you go, sir.
Thank you. Great presentation. I noticed your publication dates on the peer-reviewed stuff was 14 through 18. I know you're continuing to work on this. There was no mention of COVID. This is all pre-COVID and long-term impacts of COVID. I'm just curious as to how that's impacted your research and how you're collaborating with other folks on trying to understand the impacts of that virus.
It's a great question, and I will tell you, It touches us in many ways. And let's start with when all of clinical research was shut down. So all of clinical research was shut down in March of 2020, nationwide. March 17th, I'll never forget it. We're done until we figure this thing out. So that impacted all of our research, right? We froze protocols. We had studies across probably 7 or 8 diseases at that time. All of that got frozen. Now, coming out of that, where clinical research is now active again and is almost normal, although we do have increased safety protocols for both team members on the research side as well as participants. We are very much more cognizant of COVID, and we monitor incidents as well as how to deal with positives and so forth. That's all part of the new research wave that I don't expect that's going to go away anytime soon. But we are up and running. You're correct about the range of dates. All of that, I wanted to tell you sort of a full story from one of our last efforts before coming to IHMC, because all of the IHMC efforts are underway, right? These studies take 4 or 5 years. You know, I'm a year and 10 months into this deal. We're excited about what we're doing, but I really can't show you early results of anything yet. It's all going on. So now those studies that were frozen, I will tell you, we had a lot of steps to take to reinvigorate those, sort of turn the light back on. And in doing that, we had a delay, no question, but we were back up and running in less than 6 months. We just had to introduce a lot of new approaches to make sure we were managing it right. I do think those 6 months, and some universities and some academic medical centers, it's been a year plus before they could get fully back up to speed. It impacted the research team for sure, because now the way they have to work every day changed a lot. It also impacted the participants. They wanted to make sure that if they volunteered to do this, that they were going to be safe. And so it certainly changed the culture, but I do think, just in the last year and a half, I think people have made the right adjustments to where we are back up to speed. Yes?
Could you tell us a little bit about the high-intensity exercise protocols for the Parkinson's patients? What were they doing that allowed these great changes in only 4 months?
Sure. So we did a combination of things. So we wanted to strengthen all the muscles. So that involved strength training or resistance training, weight training, right? We wanted to elevate their heart rate to get some benefits for endurance and cardiorespiratory fitness. And so we, instead of having them do more traditional exercise on a stationary bike or a treadmill, we actually had them do intervals using their body weight, and we were having them move rapidly, okay, in a variety of different ways. One of the things I talked about was bradykinesia, right, slowness of movement. We wanted to try to overcome that by putting them in a safe environment and trying to encourage them to move fast and get their heart rate up. And so it was a combination of what I would call high-intensity interval training and strength training or resistance training. But it was all accomplished in about 40 to 45 minutes, 3 days a week. Yeah, I mean, you could say calisthenics. I mean, these were, some modified forms of lunges, push-ups, step-ups, some what I would call sort of split squats, things that, stuff like that. Things that force them to balance themselves, move somewhat explosively, and doing it repeated over and over again. Yes?
Do I have to talk into this? So your research looking at cold water tolerance in swimmers. I'm wondering what the proposed mechanism is for oxytocin affecting that, and then maybe what your hypothesis for how that would affect it. That's
a great question. So oxytocin, I I didn't put the slide up because you would all get blurry-eyed, but it's what we call a pleiotropic hormone, meaning the downstream signaling inside the cell activates a whole bunch of different pathways. When it comes to cold water tolerance, we're mostly interested in evidence that oxytocin can actually help maintain executive function under any stressor, not just cold. We're using cold as our stressor, but there's no really direct evidence that it works in cold. We just think it works under stress. Now, the other protocol, which is part of that, is the swim study. That's in neutral temperature water, but that's a high intensity. We have at IHMC, we have what's called a wave pool. It's like a treadmill. Essentially, you swim in place against water coming at you. I should have put a picture up, or a video actually. But for that, we can give somebody a 30-minute swim at a relatively high intensity, monitor their heart rate the whole time, and we think in that scenario, what we're trying to do is mitigate what results in inflammation as well as oxidative stress at the cells. So there's evidence to support this for oxytocin, but it's never been tested in humans in this way.
Regarding the chronic disease, about epigenetics, when you were with those patients or people that you were evaluating, how did you connect the level or measure cortisol, the adrenals, and how did you invert that results from what you found?
So we actually, it's a great point. So I didn't show it, but for all of these projects, whether it's the elite performer or the chronic disease, we also run a panel of clinically relevant targeted hormones and growth factors and inflammatory molecules in the blood. Some of those we also do in urine samples and saliva samples as well. What I didn't show you is in that military project, when we look at things like cortisol under stress, it goes back to the idea of the cool customer, because the people who had the highest cortisol spike in response to the same physical and cognitive challenge that everybody else got, they're the ones that tended not to do well and ultimately not get selected for this military specialty. Whereas those who sort of had a quiet cortisol profile, as well as some other stress-related profiles that we did, just came out better. So we do run all those things. For some of the studies, we do all metabolites in the blood, so we call that metabolomics, where we're interested in the targeted molecules as well as discovering new things. But for that we did, and in the Parkinson's, the same thing. We ran a panel of hormones that we think influence musculoskeletal growth and recovery, a panel of things that influence stress and inflammation. And what we really find is that people who come into the study more inflamed tend to be the ones that don't do quite as well. Okay? Now, they certainly get a lot of benefit, but the people who get more benefit are the ones that are, from an inflammation standpoint, more quiet coming in. Does that make sense? Yep.
Wanted to, on the note of cortisol profiles, is there ways to lower your profile to kind of become the cool customer or head in that direction?
We hope so. Don't have the answer yet, but that's why we do all the molecular mapping, right? Okay. So we want to try to understand why those people are having a heightened stress response. I don't have all the answers yet, but we have people like Kayleen Lavin and, in fact, Arash Mahari here in the back, standing up, one of our brilliant, artificial intelligence, machine learning scientists. He and Kayleen are working together to sort of unravel some of this. We've got over 1 million data points, and you want to figure out which ones are actually relevant for something like cortisol elevation. So, it's exciting that we're working through it.
Thanks for a great lecture. What parallels can you draw with Dr. Cunane's work where he used ketones with dementia in Canada? Kind of in the same model. He exercised them for 3 times a week, high intensity, and he found major improvements in cognition, in demented patients. So I see a lot of parallels with this and what he's doing. What do you have any comments?
Well, I think it's clear that if used effectively, ketone ester supplementation has cognitive benefit. We actually have a number of studies where we're using it in extreme environments, like altitude, for example, to determine whether or not it actually helps to maintain cognitive performance. We have not coupled a ketone ester with a clinical population like Parkinson's or someone with mild cognitive impairment and so forth. I think there's great opportunity to do that. There's another area, and the reason why these esters may be useful, you probably know this, but for the audience, they provide an energy substrate or an energy source for the brain where the brain can now operate on something other than sugar. And we have mechanisms that deliver sugar to the brain that in certain environments, when we're not delivering as much blood flow or we're not delivering as much oxygen, those mechanisms don't work as well. And so the idea is if you have extra ketones available, you may maintain brain cell function better in an extreme state or in a disease state. So I think the future is bright for those. And I didn't emphasize it, but we are very interested in what I call combinatorial treatments. So you take 2 or 3 things and test them individually and together to see if there's any synergy. And we've done that. I didn't show some of that, but we've done, for example, exercise plus drug studies in aging and in other groups, and just try to find out if we can overcome some of the obstacles that are impacting the people who are not responding as well. To me, that's the answer, is I want to know, if we ran all of you through a program, I'd have these extreme responders and lesser responders. Is there something I can do to boost this side so that all of you are at the higher end of response rate? And so we're interested in those things for sure.
I'm curious with the military study that you did they, what were the stressors that you placed on them? Because to me, my latest line this week is a test if you know we're being tested? So
Yeah.
Did they all know that they were vying for a promotion? And then
All right, I'm going to give you I'm going to give you this as best I can without a lot of detail.
Mm-hmm.
This is a group of people who were identified to compete for slots on an elite team.
All right, so they knew.
So they knew they were going for they all had the same motivation. They all wanted to be selected, right? Mm-hmm. And what they went through for stressors, the way the course is designed, they do not know what's coming. So we, as a research team, we were on site where they were located, sometimes at 3:30, 4 a.m., because we knew they were going to be awoken at 4 a.m. They didn't. And we knew what was coming, and they didn't, right? So it was really teasing out the people who could rise to the challenges every day and get through the week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever the case may be without, musculoskeletal injury or just psychological washout, just I can't do this anymore sort of thing. There's actually in the military, there is a category for people who choose to not continue. It's self-initiated elimination.
So with your Parkinson study, so just on a basic level, when you work out, I'm going an extra 5 minutes and 10 minutes, and you're doing it because you're pushing yourself. You want to get that extra. Everybody from the Parkinson study chose to be in it. But I'm wondering, did some people are like, this is too much work. I'm exhausted. I've gone jogging with my kids. I'm like, just the next mailbox. Right. They're like, no. Like what was the motivation? Were they all they obviously all volunteered
Yeah.
for it. Did some of your participants opt out because it was just too much work?
In Parkinson's, no. I mean, in every study we've ever done, every clinical trial I've ever done, there are always going to be some people who withdraw at various points for various reasons. New job, moving away, don't like this, didn't like the muscle biopsy, don't like the max test, whatever. Lots of reasons, right? And they know and we know that they are volunteers and they can make that decision anytime they want. But in Parkinson's, it's a unique group of people, I have to say. From my experience, we had the highest rate of adherence I've ever had. They didn't just show up every day, they showed up early. They were hyper motivated, and they're motivated not for themselves as much as they are for the future of the disease. It's really amazing. These people know that they're in stage 2 or stage 3 out of 5 stages. We recruit, I didn't say that, but Parkinson's is staged from 1 to 5 clinically. To tolerate our program, we could not recruit people in stage 4 or 5. So we recruited 2s and 3s. And these people know, look, I might get some short-term benefit, but really what I'm trying to do is improve the science and ultimately improve the treatment for the next wave of people. It's not going to take my Parkinson's away, So I found them to be absolutely amazing people. I didn't talk about a follow-up clinical trial we did, but we did a large study, 2 sites, and I'll just give you in the nutshell. And where's Dr. J? I had a great time talking to a neurologist earlier who's also a sleep specialist.
He had a 7 o'clock meeting.
Oh, he's gone?
Yeah.
Anyway, I had a great chat with him, and I will just say, in our follow-up study, the focus was actually on brain function and sleep quality, and we had a sleep laboratory where they'd spend the night, and we would put all these electrodes on and monitor their brains and so forth. And that same high-intensity exercise program improved sleep quality and ultimately improved executive function or cognitive function. So that was just another sort of layer to it that we're excited about. But I would love to run trials with people with Parkinson's every day because they're just hyper motivated.
Maybe one last question we have time for. I see one down here. Okay. Okay.
My husband and I have been interested in improving lifespan for quite a while now. I'm 70, he's 74. And we have a number of people we follow, podcasts, things like that. Dr. Peter Attia is one of them. Dr. David Sinclair is another one. Do you have any people who are working with to share what their research is in healthspan with the public? You have any other recommendations for people to look into, to follow?
Well, those are 2 great people, for sure. I think understanding potential treatments for what might extend lifespan, which is what both of those scientists have contributed. Those are important folks. I think when it comes to health span, a lot of people in science are interested in health span. If you look at the curve I put up, it's not as much focused on more years. It's focused on better years. There's an entire group right up the street, and one of them is back there, Dr. Stephen Anton. So University of Florida has a very strong aging research program, much focused on health span. IHMC has, are you familiar with IHMC's STEM Talk? So I highly encourage all of you to look at the menu of recorded STEM Talks. IHMC's STEM Talk is one of the highest ranked STEM podcasts in the world for science and technology. And they've interviewed both of those gentlemen, by the way, and many others who are focused on health span. So I think that's a good place to start. I think now we're up to like episode 135, right?
We have, what is it now? It's like 4.2 million listeners a day. on STEM Talk.
So go to the IHMC website, and STEM Talk has its own sort of branch site. Also, it's on all of the podcast apps, right? I highly encourage you to go through that and identify topics that you're interested in.
Absolutely. So y'all, can we, do we have one more question? Okay, one more, that's it.
No, he was just saying, that's Dr. J.
Yeah, Dr. J, it's right here. We thought you left.
It actually worked out well. Talking to a neurologist and a sleep specialist was perfect for me right before this. So. Hopefully he doesn't disagree with everything I said.
So y'all, let's thank Dr. Bamman.